As I mentioned last time I gave this message on why a daughter needs a dad, it's a subject that my wife and I are very passionate about, and our daughter and son too, because our family has experienced both extremes of that relationship. On the one hand, my wife Linda never knew her dad until she was 33 years old and always missed having a relationship with her dad or even knowing who her dad was. And on the other hand, our daughter Tiffany and I have always had a really good relationship. And so my purpose today is to encourage all of us fathers and us men to develop a really close relationship with our daughters if we haven't already done that, and if we have, to fortify that and keep that up. And then also we'll be discussing our responsibility as men to be fathers to the fatherless. And a lot of this applies to you women too, because there's a lot of fatherless in the world, both boys and girls. So to recap some on the father's responsibility, you know, it's the father's responsibility from birth, in the right order of things, to develop a really close relationship with his daughter. And even from the time before she's born, like I mentioned before, both for our daughter and also our grandson and granddaughter, I would put my face down to my wife's stomach or our daughter's stomach and talk to the unborn child before they were born, or read a book. I would read our daughter and son, when they were real little, their favorite book was The Bear in the Boat. And I could practically recite it from memory, and so I would recite that to our grandson and granddaughter before they were born. And from what I understand, the unborn child can recognize certain voices, like the mother's voice and the father's voice, before they're even born, which is pretty amazing. So the relationship between a father and his daughter is the most neglected relationship in the family in our society, and that's really unfortunate. And I had debated about reading this. I think I brought this last time, but I've never read it. I've never read it publicly before. But when my wife and I found out that Linda was pregnant with our daughter, who was our first child, it was a big deal to us. It wasn't something, you know, just flippant or something we took lightly. And we could spend the rest of the day talking about my faults, my weaknesses, but we don't have time for that. So we'll discuss a thing or two maybe I got right. And you know, even a blind squirrel gets a nut once in a while. So the night that Tiffany was born, Linda and Tiffany were still in the hospital, and I went home and I got a piece of my old letterhead from a business I had started a few years before, and I wrote down my affectionate thoughts toward Tiffany that night. And I want to read that here. I wrote that down, and then when she turned 21, I did an evaluation of her life from birth to age 21, and I was just amazed when I did that how much she had turned out like what I had written down the night she was born. And so I want to read that here. Okay, the date is September 11th, 1979. I wrote, this was the night she was born, "May we always remember that Tiffany Michelle is a great blessing and responsibility, not a possession. A blessing because of her tenderness, the sharing of our lives, the joy of sharing her development into a mature, refined, and responsible lady. A responsibility because of our desired obligation to mold her into a wise, talented, mature lady with the character of God. Among our responsibilities are the necessity to teach her self-discipline, the value of hard work, tenacity, striving toward a goal, and letting her experience the penalty when making a wrong decision and reaping the benefits when choosing the right decision. Not a possession, because she is a possession of God. We are God's stewards. Her reason for existence is not for our financial or other inordinate gain, but to develop God's character, live a Christian life, and obtain self-fulfillment. Signed, Daddy. And here's, obviously I didn't have the pictures when she was born, but when I did an evaluation on her life at 21, I printed this up on the computer and added the pictures. Okay, when she turned 21, you can't see it from there, but the paper I selected is actually a setting of grapes and wine glasses on a table. And I selected that purposefully. So when she turned 21, dearest Tiffany, when you were born, I wrote down my affectionate thoughts, hopes, and aspirations for you, as well as our God-given responsibility to help mold you into a fine young lady. And you got to keep in mind that the reason I'm sharing this with you is I don't see any little kids running around here or anybody that looks like they're about ready to have a child, but I highly, highly recommend that if you pass this along to somebody, if just one person passes this along to somebody that's about to have a baby or going to be having a baby soon, it would be worth it 1,000 times over if just one person would do this and have a plan for their child's life. And I'm not talking about what I wish I had done when I was a kid. I'm talking about focusing on the character you want to help God build in them. So it's not about being everything that you had wanted to be when you were growing up and wasn't, but it's about instilling God's character in them. So to continue here, it is a joy beyond description to reflect over your first 21 years of life and to admire the fine young lady of godly character you have become. You have more self-discipline than anyone we know. And that's true. Tiffany's always had a lot of self-discipline. You've always excelled, reading 241 books in the first grade, playing the oboe, cheerleading, being on the Honey Bears drill team, which was the drill team in the high school in Gladewater, being in the vocal ensemble and vocal performances, in parentheses, my favorite. She's got a beautiful voice. Having a 4.0 first semester at Southwest Texas University, having a lot of good friends, studying and traveling throughout Europe. She made really good grades, and she got a scholarship or partial scholarship to go to France one summer during college. And then they got to travel all over. And this is close to my heart, and being the world's best daddy's little girl. God our Father must be especially proud of you as He continues to mold and guide you into royalty as a member of His family. We have given you roots and wings, roots to know where home is, and wings to fly and exercise the truth you've been taught. It is with much anticipation that we watch your future unfold as you continue to make right choices and have a wonderful family of your own, which she has gone on to do. We would like to raise a toast to you, Tiffany, on your 21st birthday in honor of you for your tenderness, godly character, wisdom, and resolve. If you were not our little girl, we would always wish that you were. And then I put, never give in, never, never, never. Love always, with deepest affection, Daddy and Mom. The reason for the never, never, never is because I knew she would know that what that was about was when Tiffany was in, I think, the second grade or first grade, and Chris was a year younger. I had both of them memorize Winston Churchill's speech, never give in. And last I knew of, Tiffany still had a plaque like that on her desk in her law firm. But I highly recommend People make plans to win a football game and all kinds of things we make plans for, but we really should make plans for how we're going to work with God to instill godly character in our children and to build a really close relationship with them. So as I mentioned a while ago, the relationship between a father and his daughter is the most neglected relationship in our families, in our society. And nobody gets a free pass on this. We're all either a father, a daughter, or the son of a daughter who's a future prospective father. So this affects all of us. And it's our job as fathers to reflect the love of God to our children, so our children can make a connection with God. And those, far too many people in our society have not had that example of what a loving physical father's like, and it makes it more difficult for them to have a close relationship with our Heavenly Father. And I was really, really impressed and really pleased last time we were here how many of the ladies here said that they had a good relationship with their dad. That's great. I was really thrilled to hear that because I don't hear that a whole lot. I mentioned before, what actually prompted me to speak on this message the first time, it's been 14 years ago, was Tiffany bought me this book when she was in law school, right before she was getting ready to take off for the feast. So things were really busy. She's trying to work ahead in college or law school, and still took time to write personal notes to me. This book is titled Why a Daughter Needs a Dad, 100 Reasons. So there's 100 reasons in here cited why a daughter needs a dad, and Tiffany took time to write personal notes to me on about half the pages in here. And as I mentioned before, I don't know that I've ever picked this book up and read some in it without it bringing tears to my eyes. And this book, Why a Daughter Needs a Dad, is written by Gregory E. Lang, L-A-N-G. So I want to recap just a few of my favorite reasons cited in this book, Why a Daughter Needs a Dad. A daughter needs a dad to be the safe spot she can always turn to. A daughter needs a dad to teach her by his example how to recognize a gentleman. A daughter needs a dad to be the standard against which she will judge all men. To hold her as she cries. A daughter needs a dad to set a moral standard for her. And one of my favorites, a daughter needs a dad to stand with her on the day she marries the man that she hopes will be just like her dad. And then one last one here, a daughter needs a dad to be the one hero who will never let her down. So we need to here's some things that our daughters need to know from us, just briefly as a recap. Our daughters need to know daily that we love them, and we need to prove it by our actions. We need to let her know that we're proud of her and why we're proud of her, not just a hollow, hey, I'm proud of you, but I'm proud of you because you've worked so hard, you're so industrious, you never give up, all these wonderful qualities. We need to validate her with her self-worth. Don't just, if she comes to talk to you, ask you about something, don't just say I'm busy, just ignore her. Take the time. She's very important. Take the time and discuss with her what she wants to discuss, and that will help give her wisdom, and it will validate in her that her conversation is worthy of being listened to. We need to tell her honestly that she's beautiful. Society comes up with their own standards of beauty, but God doesn't make any mistakes. We don't all have to look like this perfect model that's probably way too skinny in a magazine. But we need to tell our daughter honestly that she's beautiful. And we need to tell her also, make her know that the greatest beauty of all comes from right in here, comes from the heart. And we need to help her establish her independence. which what we tried to always do with our daughter and son is, as they made, no matter what age they were, whether they were 2 years old or 18 years old, is they made good, wise choices to give them more liberty, a little more liberty to make better choices. I mean to continue to make choices on a higher level. Another very important thing, the last part of the recap, is we need to always be there for our daughter, whether she's 6 months old, 5 years old, 25 years old, or 75 years old. And you might be amazed how many ladies have come and talked to me in tears in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s, and I think one probably in her 80s, in tears because of the ache they had for never having that close relationship with their dad that they had always yearned for. So that's the recap for part 2 that I wanted to bring today. The point 2 is the importance of the daughter's role. We've discussed the father's role, which that's the beginning point. But also the daughter's role is important. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. This is the 5th commandment. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. And that's in the New King James. I want to read it also in the Amplified. The Amplified, Exodus 20, verse 12. Regard, treat with honor, do obedience and courtesy your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God gives you. And then, of course, that same command is repeated in Deuteronomy 5:16. But it's the daughter's responsibility to honor their father and mother. Of course, you can only honor what is honorable. You can't honor something that's not honorable, but everyone has at least some things about them that is honorable. That's what Tiffany did when she bought this book and wrote in it and gave it to me as a gift. She was honoring me. And just as the Amplified Bible says in Exodus 20, she treated me with honor and courtesy and expressed deep gratitude in many ways. And honoring a parent, a child honoring a parent, whether a young child or an adult child, is a very powerful action, because when you honor a parent, you give that parent something more to aspire to. We can pick out the good points of that parent, of the father, and discuss that with him, and that makes him want to try harder to do even better. Or if he hasn't done good, the tendency will be for him to do better than he's done in the past. And the same principle works with parents interacting with their children. If we compliment our children on their strong points and what they've done well, that makes them want to aspire to do even better. So a daughter strengthens her relationship when she reflects back to her father the love that he has so freely given her. And it's good. We all need to do this. My mother is still alive, and I need to do this with my mother. I have a good relationship with my mother, but it's always good to reflect back on a lot of things they've done in your life that they've done for you, and then compliment them on that. That would be really, really helpful to the parents. And our society tends to be so busy. It seems like there's always a radio on or TV on or conversation going on, but it's really important to take time just in peace and solitude. Go out and sit under a tree somewhere or somewhere peaceful and just contemplate what a blessing your father has been to you. And then lavish your dad with the appreciation and all his years of love and concern. And when daughters do that, you might be amazed, even though maybe your relationship hasn't been as strong as you would like it to been with your dad, you might be amazed at how much stronger that will make your relationship. point 3 is what if you are a grown daughter who has not had a good relationship with your dad? Or maybe you're in the category that my wife was in. For her first 33 years, maybe you never knew your dad at all. You know, no doubt there's some here that some ladies that have already lost their father, or maybe some like my wife that has never known your father. Well, take heart, because there's still hope. My wife didn't know her dad until she was 33, but then once we found out who he was and went to Tennessee and met him, we had an amazing relationship with him for the next 19 and a half years until he died. He was, I think it's Isaiah 62, first few verses, where God says, "To this man will I look, he who is humble and of a contrite heart and who trembles at my word." That was Linda's dad. He was just a wonderful man. And come find out, he'd been in the church all these years. It basically was a DNR situation back starting before Linda was born. So as a group, men, we need to do a lot better. And you know, you can just look at society. My wife and I have rental property, and I deal with this on a daily basis regarding fatherless. You know, guys shacking up with the girls. Girl gets pregnant, guy takes off, goes finds another girlfriend. We live in such a broken society. But personally, I know there's bound to be extenuating circumstances, but and we've all made mistakes, but I don't know of any excuse that's good enough for a father not having a strong relationship with his daughter. I'm sure in divorces where there's cases where, he's not allowed to be around or something, but we need to recognize where we've fallen short and then ask God to forgive us of that, and then to move on from there and develop that strong relationship. Let's turn to Romans chapter 12, verse 18. This is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. Romans chapter 12, verse 18. This can be applied if a lady hasn't had a good relationship with her dad. This verse can be applied. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. And this certainly applies to the relationship between a daughter and her father. And if you haven't had a good relationship with your father, the place to begin is in earnest prayer with God. And asking God, we all make mistakes, and the best place to begin probably is to ask God where you have come up short. No doubt your father has come up short too, but it's good to examine ourselves first and ask God to show us where we've come up short, and then how to change that and interact as we should. And so, as much as is appropriate, and that phrase, as much as is appropriate, needs to be applied as it needs to be. But as much as is appropriate, the lady can take it upon herself to try to initiate a relationship with her dad if it's been broken or never had one. You might be amazed at the outcome. And actually, that's what my wife did when she was 33 years old, when we found out, we were told who her dad was and that he lived in Tennessee. We got his phone number. And it took Linda about 2 weeks to get the courage up to call him, because, at least in part because of the possible rejection, if she called him. And actually, I don't know if I've mentioned this before or not, it's rather quite miraculous, and I can prove it mathematically, but it took Linda about 2 weeks to get the courage up to call her dad. We had a slimline phone, wall-mounted phone in the kitchen. I distinctly remember Linda reaching out to get the phone, and when her hand was about that far from the phone, here's the phone, the phone rang. And it was one of Linda's sisters calling to tell Linda that the one that she had never knew but always was led to believe was her dad had just died. If you do the math on that, which I've done, the odds are like billions to one that when Linda reaches out to her dad and finds out that the one she always thought was her dad wasn't, it's like I said, the odds are billions to one. So it took Linda, I think it's another week or two to get her courage back up to call her dad. And when she called, she asked him, she told him who she was, and she asked him, "Can I call you Daddy?" And he said yes. And that was the beginning of a wonderful relationship with a wonderful father. So even if your dad hasn't done right by you, you can try to start a relationship right now. And if you contemplate on his strong points, and that even if you've already lost your dad, you can still contemplate his strong points, and that will be healing to you, at least to a degree. That would be helpful. Or hopefully if he's still alive, you can contact him and begin to build that relationship, which should have been there all along. And you can, if your dad has already died, and you contemplate his good qualities and meditate on the fact that, number one, you wouldn't have life if he wasn't your father, you can develop a heart to at least want to thank him for his good qualities and for giving you life when he's raised from the dead. And if your dad is still alive, then certainly meditate and contemplate on your cherished memories. You know, surely we all have cherished memories from our parents, at least some, and then compliment him on his good traits. And this is something I like to do. You can write him a note. You know, maybe he's been a hardliner your whole life, and from time to time I'll write somebody a note, like maybe it was a good sermon or really good special music or something. A lot of times I'll write a note. If I got a gum wrapper in my pocket, I'll pull it out and write somebody a note on it. Hey, great job on the special music. That was wonderful and inspiring. And I think I'd rather have a note written on a piece of scrap paper than some fancy note. But you might, if you do that, try that with your dad, that you haven't had a good relationship, and you might very well find that you just unlocked the teddy bear that's been inside of him all these years, and it might very well bring tears to his eyes. So by opening up communications with him, you might inspire him to be more than what he's been in the past. And you could very well end up opening up a lifelong relationship with him that's invaluable. The fourth and last category I'd like to discuss is, and this is huge, is our responsibility, us men, our responsibility to be fathers to the fatherless. Unfortunately, our society has a lot of fatherless children, boys and girls. You know, we're here to discuss God. Let's turn to James chapter 1, verse 27. James chapter 1, verse 27. And we'll, as I said, we're here to discuss God. And so let's read a little bit about what pure religion is. James chapter 1, verse 27. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. And I want to read that now in the Amplified. To visit and help and care for the orphans and the widows in their affliction and need. If you do either get in your concordance or do a word search online on fatherless or widow or oppressed or defenseless, that's a really big deal to God. I mean, there's scripture after scripture after scripture. God is really concerned about the fatherless and the widow and just the oppressed and defenseless in general. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 22, verses 22 through 24. Exodus chapter 22, verses 22 through 24. This is a pretty stern warning from God. And the reason is because God is a God of love, and He doesn't like seeing His children being mistreated. Exodus 22, starting verse 22. You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way, and they cry at all to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will become hot. He doesn't say, I'm kind of not going to like that if you mistreat the fatherless and the widows. He says, my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. So that's a pretty big deal to God, that we don't oppress the fatherless or the widows, but that we care for them. And I'll just quote Psalms chapter 82, verse 3. It says, God says, defend the poor and the fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and the needy. So God created the perfect family unit with the husband and the wife and the son and the daughter. But unfortunately, we live in a broken society that's abandoned God's 10 Commandments for the most part, and it's just a move that's going, it's amazing how far that's gone with, prayer was made illegal in the schools, I think back in the 60s. But then with all the craziness going on now, these crazy laws that they're trying to get passed, and that they are getting passed. But truth is still truth regardless. But our society has just become incredibly broken. Like God said, not calling good evil and evil good. And that I was scanned an article yesterday about in the state of California, a law has been introduced where if an elderly person is in a nursing home, and if they're considered transgender, that if someone there on the staff, if this person was born a man, and he's still a man, regardless of what surgery he's had, but if he wants to identify as a woman and you call him a man, you can be arrested and put in jail, I think up to a $1,000 fine and up to 1 year prison sentence. It's just absolutely insane. But still, regardless of what society does, God is God. He created us. He's almighty. And what God says stands. As I mentioned, we have rental property, and I deal with this kind of thing on a regular basis with broken homes and women getting pregnant out of wedlock and having another fatherless child, and then it just goes on and on. But we need to do our part to be a light to the world. And I'll read some statistics here from the National Center for Fathering. This is about the consequences of growing up in a fatherless home. Children raised in a home without a father are 4 times more likely to live in poverty. And to quote, some fathering advocates would say that almost every social ill faced by America's children is related to fatherlessness. And so I'm going to read 6 that they quoted, 6 social ills quoted below here that's directly connected to fatherless. These are severe problems that fatherless children tend to have. They have higher poverty rates, 2, higher rates of drug and alcohol abuse, 3, higher rate of physical and emotional health problems, 4, lower educational achievements, 5, higher rate of crime, and 6, higher rate of sexual activity in teen pregnancy, which goes full circle all the way back to my point 1 in part 1 message, that daughters that grow up without their dad are much more likely to be sexually active strictly because they long for the love and affection of a man or of a boy that they never got from their father. So they're willing to be sexually active to try to fulfill that missing hole. So let's discuss being a father to the fatherless. And I'd like you to go ahead and turn to Galatians chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. Galatians chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. Verse 9, and let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. And I want to read verse 10 in the Amplified, which I really like to do a lot of times because it sheds more light on it. The Amplified, verse 10, so then, as occasion and opportunity open up to us, let us do good morally to all people, not only being useful or profitable to them, but also doing what is for their spiritual good and advantage. Be mindful to be a blessing, especially to those of the household of faith, those who belong to God's family with you, the believers. So we need to be willing to be a father to the fatherless wherever and whatever circumstances that might be that we feel like God has led us to that. There's some circumstances where it would not be appropriate, but most of all to those in the household of faith. And a note of caution here is, again, we live in a really messed up, broken society. As we're a father to the fatherless, we need to be absolutely sure our actions are purely godly, wise, and prudent in every way. As I told our daughter when she was growing up and when she was a teenager, don't put yourself in a bad situation. And if a man has wrong tendencies in that area, stay away from the girls. Don't be a lecher. This is a word that I learned recently. If you don't know what it means, look it up in the dictionary. But what it means is a dirty old man. Don't be a dirty old man. My wife and I and our son and daughter knew of a case years ago in another congregation. This man that I considered elderly, I think of him as, it's been 30 years ago, so I think of him as less elderly now, maybe somewhat elderly. Maybe he was about, well, I'm not going to say that. I was going to say maybe he's about my age, but I'm not elderly. But anyway, this man, as soon as church was over, he would make a beeline to all the young ladies who their bodies had developed in the congregation. He'd go give them all a tight hug. Don't be that man. So with that said, who can we be a father to the fatherless to? You know, who would be good candidates? And I'll share. I'm pretty sure that I mentioned here before about a lifelong friend of mine, Eddie Landis, that died 26 years ago. He didn't die from, he had cancer, but it was the chemo that killed him. I was the best man at their wedding up in Indiana. 3 years later, I was a pallbearer at Eddie's funeral. I had gone up 2 weeks before he died. I went up and spent 5 days with them. They had, Eddie and Paula had this beautiful little girl about 1.5 years old, and Eddie's wife was pregnant with their second daughter. 2 weeks after I came home, Eddie died. We went back to Indiana, and I was a pallbearer at his funeral. But over the years, we stayed in contact with Eddie's widow and with the girls, and also she remarried in about, I think it's about 2 or 2.5 years. She met this wonderful man and got remarried, and he was a real answer to prayer, because he's been such a huge blessing to Paula and the girls, and he's just an awesome guy. I asked him a few years ago. I told him I'd like a favor, and he said, "What's that?" This is at their oldest daughter's wedding up in Ohio. I said I'd like to have his friendship, and he agreed. So he's a good friend of ours now. But I'll just give you an example of what an awesome blessing it can be, not only for a daughter or a fatherless daughter, but also a son. But we need to think about and keep an eye out, who can we be a father to the fatherless? And to a degree, we've somewhat played that role with Karita and Shauna, even though Paula got remarried to a wonderful man that's just an incredible guy. I'd love to see him right now. He's just an awesome man. But we stayed in contact and over the years, and then as they each graduated, one graduated from high school, losing track of time. It's been about 11 years ago, I guess, and then the next one, the one that was born after Eddie died, graduated the next year. When they graduated from high school, I wrote each of them, first one year and the other one the next year, even though we wrote in between. But I wrote them both a letter and told them some things that I thought their dad would want them to know at that point in their lives. And I told them about a little bit, fair amount about their dad, what a wonderful guy he was, and he had just this incredible sense of humor. And so I told them some things about their dad, and other things that I felt like they should know that their dad would want to tell them at that point in their lives. And then we went up to Karita, the one that was a year and a half old when Eddie died. We went up to her wedding. That's been, again, I'm losing track of time, seven years ago maybe, up to Ohio. And I was really honored, and after the resurrection, I'm sure Eddie's going to be really, really pleased with this, but I was really honored. Number one, their mother, Paula, she makes cakes, like big fancy wedding cakes. And she had made, they live in Indiana, so she had to transport this cake to Ohio. But she made this, I think it was a 6-tier wedding cake that was, I don't know, probably about that high. And they trusted me. They asked me to drive the van to take it from point A a few miles away to point B, and it's all sitting on sheets or something on the floor of the van, and I'm like, I was really nervous because I'm like, I can't hit the brakes, I can't mess this up because that'd be bad. So I got it there okay, and then people stayed until, I think everybody else left about midnight. The wedding was the next day, and Paula, Karita's mother, and John, her husband, when she remarried, and I stayed until about 2:30 in the morning and stacked that cake up. And I never knew anything about how you make a wedding cake, but John had cut, I don't know how many, lots and lots of wooden dowels about that long, and you stick the dowels down in the cake, and then you set the next layer up on it. I think each layer was, I think there was about that much opening between each layer of cake, if I remember right. Maybe not. But anyway, we built that cake up. And then it really, something else that's really special to me is that Karita, she was trying to, her wedding dress was beautiful, and it had been, was hung up and had to be kept somewhere that night, and she asked me if I would keep it in my truck as a place to keep it, and I'm like, again, this is a big deal. It better not get stolen, or I better not let it get messed up. But that really meant a lot to me that they trusted, that she trusted me with those things. And then Shauna, the younger one that was born after Eddie died, again, I wrote her a letter the following year when she graduated from high school, and told her some of the things that I felt sure Ed would want to tell her, that she was beautiful, and she is, and she's beautiful inside. I told her that a boy that really loves you will protect your honor, not try to get the one thing that all guys want, but he'll preserve your honor for your marriage and things like that. And when Shauna was still in college, working on her bachelor's degree, she called one day. This has been 7 or 8 years ago probably. She called one day in December and wanted to know if she could come down, fly down from Indianapolis to Dallas to visit Linda and I for a few days. And I was just thrilled that she wanted to do that she would take the time off during her college break to come down and spend the money to fly down and visit us. And so she did, and that was just such a good experience. And Shauna and I sat there in front of the fireplace in the dining room one night playing checkers, facing each other, and it just dumbfounded me. I'd make a move and she'd go, just like her dad would do. She'd study it and she'd go like that back and forth. And I just couldn't get over that. But she never met her dad, but it's awesome how God created families that things like that are passed down when they never even met. And one morning when she was there visiting, when I got up, there was a coffee pot in the kitchen, and I asked Shauna, I said, do you drink yesterday's coffee? And she pondered it for a moment. She said, I'm going to write a book, and that's what I'm going to title it, Yesterday's Coffee. Here's the book. And I explained to her that her dad was the one that taught me that it's okay to drink yesterday's coffee. And if there's any coffee connoisseurs out here, I don't mean to offend you. I don't have a sense of smell, and I wouldn't know yesterday's coffee from today's coffee. To me, it's just coffee and it's got caffeine in it. But sure enough, and Shauna's that's one of her strong attributes, is she has an incredible sense of humor, and she's an excellent writer and an artist too. And her sister Karita designed the cover of this book, so Karita had a hand in it too. But anyway, she got this book published and sent us 2 copies of it, and it's just hysterical to read. But it's basically about her coming down to visit Linda and I here in Texas. I wouldn't take anything for this. Written by Shauna Dean Landis. And whenever she writes a letter, we email back and forth frequently. I always got a kick out of it because at the bottom of her letter, she would write, I always try to write all the way to the bottom of the page. And it might be 2 or 3 pages long, but it's a big deal to her, write all the way to the bottom of the page. And then she would sign it, the one and only Shauna Dean Landis. She's pretty special. So, hopefully the relationship with Shauna and Karita has been very beneficial to them, and it's been huge to Linda and I. We wouldn't take anything for their relationship. And at Shauna's wedding, she got married, I think almost 3 years ago. I think it'll be 4 years, Linda says, in October. And she had wanted Linda and I not only to come to her wedding, wanted us to be in the wedding. And we were really honored that they wanted us to sit with the family, which Karita did at her wedding too. And they had Linda and I walk with the family, the grandparents, and then Linda and I went, and then the grandparents and her mother, I guess, and then Linda and I. And Linda and I are walking down the aisle, and to be seated up front, and like Linda leaned over to me and said while we were walking up the aisle, and I got a kick out of it. I grew up there, but that's been about 48 years ago. So like Linda said, these people are saying, who in the world are these people? Because most of them didn't know who we were probably. But they had to sit up front, and then the plan was when John, her stepdad, walked her down the aisle, they stopped and stepped over there, and she gave me a kiss, I think, wasn't it? And then went on up to the front. But that was really, really special, really meant a whole lot to us. And Shauna even asked me, got out her dad's cufflinks and tie clasp, and I was honored that she asked me if I'd like to wear those to her wedding. So when you're being a father to the fatherless, make sure you're prudent, and always make sure you have the mother's approval or the guardian's approval. Make sure there's honorable adults around so you don't put yourself in a bad situation. And take a genuine interest in the young lady or girl, and observe. Just like with Shauna, it's quite obvious she has a real talent for writing, and observe and see what their strong points are, and then encourage them in that. I mean, God gives all of us certain God-given abilities, so we can observe them and help see what their strong points are and encourage them to develop those. We need to reflect, just like with our own daughters. There would be some things that would be appropriate with our daughters that wouldn't be appropriate with a fatherless daughter. But one thing we need to do is reflect the love of God to them, so that they know what God is like, and we need to show them by our example what a gentleman is. And as is appropriate, we need to be available for them, always with their mother's permission, and validate her with sincere compliments in her strengths, and tell her that we're proud of her and tell her why. She needs to see by our example that a man's strength is not in the force of his hand or the power of his voice, but a man's strength is in the kindness of his heart, which I can never say that without thinking of Linda's dad. That's just the way Linda's dad was. We need to let her know that a male who truly loves her will not take advantage of her, but will preserve her honor for her marriage. She needs to know, too, that the greatest beauty of all comes from right here, the heart. We need to be there at special moments for her, like, some special school activity if we can, or, wedding, or, just special moments like that. So it's good to ask yourself, look around and ask yourself, who can you be a father to with the fatherless? And I'm talking to the ladies here too. There are a lot of children, fatherless children out there that need what you have. You can encourage them if they like to read. You can encourage them with that. You can help find books that would be helpful for them to read. But there are children out there that need what you have to offer. A daughter truly does need her dad, and you may need to be a substitute dad in the proper way. And I've got a poem here. I'm not going to take time to read it, but the title of it is "Orphans of the Living," and it's a pretty thought-provoking poem. Actually, I am going to take time to read it. This is a little bit different slant on the subject, but I'll read this. Orphans of the Living by Edgar A. Guest. We think of orphans only as little girls and lads who haven't any mothers and who haven't any dads. They are grouped with other children in groups. They're put to bed, with some stranger paid to listen while their little prayers are said. All the grown-ups look with pity on such lonely children small, and declared to be an orphan is the saddest fate of all. But sometimes I look about me with sorrow and hang my head as I gaze on something sadder than the orphans of the dead. For more pitiful and tragic as the long days come and go are the orphans of the parents they're not allowed to know. They're the orphans of the living, left alone to romp and play, from their fathers and their mothers by ambition shut away. They have fathers who are busy and so weighted down with cares that they haven't time to listen to a little child's affairs. They have mothers who imagine life could give them if it would, something richer, something better than the joys of motherhood. So their children learn from strangers, and by strangers' hands are fed. And the nurse, for so much money, nightly tucks them into bed. Lord, I would not grow so busy that I cannot drop my task to answer every question which the child of mine may ask. Let me never serve ambition here so selfishly, I pray, that I cannot stop to listen to the things my little children say. For whatever cares beset them, let them know I'm standing by. I don't want to make them orphans till the day I come to die. So let's all be really, really conscious to make sure that we have strong relationships, build strong relationships with our daughters, and for the daughters to build relationships with their fathers, and also for us to be a father to the fatherless. If we do that, we will discover in both situations an invaluable relationship that can last a lifetime and beyond and for generations to come.